America has long been dominated by the two-party system, with Republicans and Democrats holding nearly every elected office in the country. Other parties are automatically referred to as third parties, and it's often said as a pejorative, with the mindset of you're not one of the big two, so you have no chance. The latest presidential election in the United States gave us a highly qualified but polarizing business-as-usual candidate versus a completely unqualified sociopathic narcissist, so there was a reasonable look toward third parties. Today we're going to look at one of these, the Libertarian Party, which did best among third parties in the most recent election. Now, I've been very critical of the Libertarian Party in the past, but I decided it was important to go through what they actually stand for and make certain that my criticisms have merit and see what they might have to offer that actually has good merit. Now, this is the United States Libertarian Party, which is far right. I understand there's also such a thing as far left libertarians, but they're basically unheard of here in the United States, and they don't seem to have any political voice at all. I'm sure that they're a little bit goofy, just like far right libertarianism is, or indeed as much as far right or far left anything is kind of goofy, more wrapped up in its own ideology than real world concerns or logic. So what I decided to do was go to the Libertarian Party's webpage and go through their official party platform item by item and see how well it holds up in terms of ideology versus logic and real world concerns. This party platform is as adopted by convention May 2016, so this is their platform during the 2016 election. It's possible, depending when you see this, that it's been changed or updated, but as of this recording, this is the current platform. I'm going to go through this in order, so we start with the preamble, which gives some basic rhetoric, followed by a statement of principles, which gives the general overview without much detail, and then it goes into the three main focuses: personal liberty, economic liberty, and securing liberty. So let's dive in and see what the leading outside contender to the two-party throne has to offer us. Preamble. As libertarians, we seek a world of liberty, a world in which all individuals are sovereign over their own lives and no one is forced to sacrifice his or her values for the benefit of others. We believe that respect for individual rights is the essential precondition for a free and prosperous world, that force and fraud must be banished from human relationships, and that only through freedom can peace and prosperity be realized. Consequently, we defend each person's right to engage in any activity that is peaceful and honest, and welcome the diversity that freedom brings. The world we seek to build is one where individuals are free to follow their own dreams in their own ways, without interference from government or any authoritarian power. In the following pages, we have set forth our basic principles and enumerated various policy stands derived from those principles. These specific policies are not our goal, however. Our goal is nothing more or less than a world set free in our lifetime, and it is to this end that we take these stands. So that's a lot all at once, but it's a general overview and there's not a whole lot to say. I don't want to quibble too much over details or word choice or things like that. For the most part, this is pretty good. There is the first hint of what will become a recurring theme, with government being none too subtly associated with authoritarian power, which is not a fair blanket description of governments. And the reference to a world set free sounds just a touch ominous. But beyond that, other than a little bit of word choice, minor details, on the surface it certainly sounds like something that I could get behind. So let's see how they approach this. Statement of principles. We, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. And right here we already get our first bit of inflammatory red flag rhetoric that presages the upcoming off-the-rails train crash that this platform will become. Spoiler alert. Cult of the omnipotent state. Really, I would be hard-pressed to find anyone who sees the government as an omnipotent state. No one says, well, I'm totally against this, but the government says so, so okay, they must know what they're talking about. I'm not sure who exactly the libertarians are challenging here, except straw men. Also note that the dismissal of government as a source of authority here makes the many times throughout this platform where they cite government as just that, all the more striking. We hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion over their own lives and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal right of others to live in whatever manner they choose. Okay, that sounds good, but it's a bit absolutist, which leads us to: governments throughout history have regularly operated on the opposite principle, that the state has the right to dispose of the lives of individuals and the fruits of their labor. Even within the United States, all political parties other than our own grant to government the right to regulate the lives of individuals and seize the fruits of their labor without their consent. So cutting through all of this, what this says is that the party is firmly opposed to two things. Dispose of the lives of individuals refers to death penalty and possibly the military draft, and dispose of the fruits of their labor refers to taxation, and libertarians are absolutely against both. We, on the contrary, deny the right of any government to do these things and hold that where governments exist, they must not violate the rights of any individual, namely, 1, the right to life. Accordingly, we support the prohibition of the initiation of physical force against others. 2, the right to liberty of speech and action. Accordingly, we oppose all attempts by government to abridge the freedom of speech and press, as well as government censorship in any form. And 3, the right to property. Accordingly, we oppose all government interference with private property, such as confiscation, nationalization, and eminent domain, and support the prohibition of robbery, trespass, fraud, and misrepresentation. And this is mostly good too. Right to life, agreed. Right to speech and liberty, agreed, though censorship is not inherently a reprehensible idea. But let's flip this around. When corporations censor speech or ideas, would the Libertarian Party be okay with that, or would they be against that? Would they support the return of the fairness doctrine to ensure ideas and information are not being censored by corporations rather than governments? Well, as we go through this, you're going to see you can spend a lot of time in this party platform wondering if they would be critical of corporations for doing the exact things that they insist that governments should not do. And despite abuses, admittedly, confiscation and eminent domain are not without warrant, and in fact are written into the Constitution. But the big one here is their comment on nationalization. The party is very much opposed to nationalization, which we will come back to. Since governments, when instituted, must not violate individual rights, we oppose all interference by government in the areas of voluntary and contractual relations among individuals. People should not be forced to sacrifice their lives and property for the benefit of others. They should be left free by government to deal with one another as free traders, and the resultant economic system, the only one compatible with the protection of individual rights, is the free market. This sounds okay until you start wondering what constitutes interference and what falls under the heading of sacrifice for the benefit of others, and whether or not that includes things as fundamental as paying taxes so that roads are paved and fire departments are funded, and what exactly constitutes a free market, of which this is the first of 9 references in this platform. We will be spending a lot more time on this later. Note, the Statement of Principles was approved at the convention in Dallas in 1974. Noted. 1.0 Personal Liberty. Individuals should be free to make choices for themselves and must accept responsibility for the consequences of the choices they make. Our support of an individual's right to make choices in life does not mean that we necessarily approve or disapprove of these choices. No individual, group, or government may initiate force against any other individual, group, or government. There's some good in here, though nothing in here promotes informed choices, which we will address when we get to the libertarian stance on education, such as it is. This is also the first reference to personal responsibility, which crops up several more times, specifically the concept of personal responsibility in the sense of accepting the consequences of actions on one's own self. It has nothing to do with accepting the consequences and responsibilities for your actions and how they affect others. 1.1 Self-ownership. Individuals own their bodies and have rights over them that other individuals, groups, and governments may not violate. Individuals have the freedom and responsibility to decide what they knowingly and voluntarily consume and what risks they accept to their own health, finances, safety, or life. I have no big problems with this concept, but there is a point to consider. What they knowingly and voluntarily consume. Manufacturers used to be able to put the phrase like contains 100% orange juice on a product where 100% orange juice was actually just a minor ingredient. The government imposed regulations on food manufacturers to label comprehensively and accurately, and that's the reason we can knowingly consume specific foods. Government regulation improves lives. Remember this point. 1.2 Expression and communication. We support full freedom of expression and oppose government censorship, regulation, or control of communications, media, and technology. We favor the freedom to engage in or abstain from any religious activities that do not violate the rights of others. We oppose government actions which either aid or attack any religion. And here's something we're going to see a lot of, specifically citing that government should not have regulation or control, but not saying anything about corporations having regulation or control. For example, net neutrality is government regulation and control of communications, media, and trade. Libertarian Party, do they support net neutrality? Well, of course, as it turns out, they do not, which leads to corporate control of communications, media, and trade. Anyone consider that better? 1.3. Privacy. Libertarians advocate individual privacy and government transparency. We are committed to ending government's practice of spying on everyone. We support the rights recognized by the Fourth Amendment to be secure in our persons, homes, property, and communications. Protection from unreasonable search and seizure should include records held by third parties, such as email, medical, and library records. Other than quibbling a little bit over minor things such as what constitutes unreasonable, frankly, this is all pretty good. 1.4. Personal relationships. Sexual orientation, preference, gender, or gender identity should have no impact on the government's treatment of individuals, such as in current marriage, child custody, adoption, immigration, or military service laws. Government does not have the authority to define, license, or restrict personal relationships. Consenting adults should be free to choose their own sexual practices and personal relationships. This is excellent too, and I can get behind this 100%. 1.5. Abortion. Okay, let's interrupt this up front to give you the analysis in advance because it will actually make more sense here. So this is far-right libertarianism. The far right is strongly anti-abortion, so to appeal to their base they have to be against abortion. But they're also libertarian, which is against government interference in people's personal lives and their right to make decisions regarding themselves, which means they have to be for abortion. So how does the party choose to handle such a glaring contradiction? How do they stand up for their principles without putting a poison pill in here that will turn off the far-right individuals that they're trying to appeal to? Like this. 1.5. Abortion. Recognizing that abortion is a sensitive issue and that people can hold good faith views on all sides, we believe that government should be kept out of the matter, leaving the question to each person for their conscientious consideration. So, what to make of that? They're against the government, of course, as always, but beyond that, remember this is an entry about abortion. Are they for it? Are they against it? Neither. This is not a position. This is, we need to address the issue without committing to anything. This says nothing. This means nothing. This takes no position. This is the coward's way out. 1.6. Parental rights. Parents, or other guardians, have the right to raise their children according to their own standards and beliefs. This statement shall not be construed to condone child abuse or neglect. This seems okay, although we will get back to this to some extent when we get to the section on education. 1.7. Crime and justice. The prescribed role of government is to protect the rights of every individual, including the right to life, liberty, and property. Criminal laws should be limited in their application to violations of the rights of others through force or fraud, or to deliberate actions that place others involuntarily at significant risk of harm. Therefore, we favor the repeal of all laws creating crimes without victims, such as the use of drugs for medicinal or recreational purposes. We support restitution to the victim to the fullest degree possible at the expense of the criminal or the negligent wrongdoer. The constitutional rights of the criminally accused, including due process, a speedy trial, legal counsel, trial by jury, and the legal presumption of innocence until proven guilty, must be preserved. We assert the common law right of juries to judge not only the facts, but also the justice of the law. This seems pretty okay, although this is also where they court the support of drug users and drug abusers, with an example that could not be more obviously targeted if it was bookended by the words paid advertisement. And let's be clear, a lot of recreational drug use does have victims. Addictions, the things that people will do to feed their addictions to themselves, to others, death from addictions, families have to pick up the pieces. You cannot declare that recreational drug use is victimless. Well, you can, but you'd be either clueless or a liar. And the ending with the right for juries to judge not only the facts, but also the justice of the law is basically another back door where the libertarians are saying that people can simply ignore the law if they're so inclined. This undercutting of the government, we've already seen some of. We're going to see a lot more of this as we go forward. 1.8. Death penalty. We oppose the administration of the death penalty by the state. Personally, I've gone back and forth on the issue of the death penalty a lot over the years. I don't really have a firm position either way, so if the death penalty were outlawed, I really have no problem with that. 1.9. Self-defense. The only legitimate use of force is in defense of individual rights, life, liberty, and justly acquired property, against aggression. This right inheres in the individual, who may agree to be aided by any other individual or group. We affirm the individual right recognized by the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms and oppose the prosecution of individuals for exercising their rights of self-defense. Private property owners should be free to establish their own conditions regarding the presence of personal defense weapons on their own property. We oppose all laws at any level of government restricting, registering, or monitoring the ownership, manufacture, or transfer of firearms or ammunition. This is where I realize that the party platform cherry-picks the Constitution as if it's the Bible. Libertarians are against eminent domain with the requirement for fair value to be paid, even though that's in the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment. Libertarians are against the seizure of the fruits of people's labor, which refers to taxation, even though that is also explicitly granted in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Powers of Congress, as well as the 16th Amendment. But when it comes to guns, all of a sudden it's, we're allowed to have guns, the Constitution says so. Either the Constitution is a valid source of argument from authority or it's not. But when you cherry pick like this, sometimes using it to support your arguments and sometimes placing your arguments in direct opposition to it, the arguments in both directions lose validity. This also makes me wonder where they stand on stand your ground laws. If libertarians are so against the use of force, why do they make it so easy to use force? Or is this being against the initiation of force in principle, but any excuse to retaliate is acceptable? I wonder. 2.0. Economic liberty. Libertarians want all members of society to have abundant opportunities to achieve economic success. A free and competitive market allocates resources in the most efficient manner. Each person has the right to offer goods and services to others on the free market. The only proper role of government in the economic realm is to protect property rights, educate disputes, and provide a legal framework in which voluntary trade is protected. All efforts by government to redistribute wealth or to control or manage trade are improper in a free society. This section about economics is where we start running into some serious problems, and it begins with sentence 2. A free and competitive market allocates resources in the most efficient manner is a basic misunderstanding of economics and is fundamentally incorrect, and it means that much of this section is built on a corrupt foundation and is fundamentally flawed. The market does not allocate resources in the most efficient manner. It allocates them in the most profitable manner, regardless of the damage that may do to people who can't afford to pay the money to create a higher profit and are therefore ignored. The belief that the market can self-regulate properly to serve all individuals is absolutely false. The water crisis in Flint, Michigan happened because of a desire for profit. The contaminated water was slightly cheaper. Healthcare is prohibitively expensive. College, the housing bubble. Free and competitive do not naturally coexist because free markets can lead to corporate monopolies which are not competitive. Unless your definition refers solely to individual profit, there is no world in which a free market is the most efficient market for allocating resources. And how does a government function to do any of this without taxation? Keeping government out of trade control transfers that responsibility to the corporations engaging in trade to police themselves. Apparently, that's considered efficient, in the sense that it's cheap and easy and allows corporations to act with impunity. But how would one go about breaking up an entrenched and inefficient but profitable corporate monopoly? If a corporation starts acting improperly or harming people while using their power to stifle competition, who would be able to do anything about it if the government is out of the picture? That's actually the question that you're not supposed to ask. 2.1. Property and contract. As respect for property rights is fundamental to maintaining a free and prosperous society, it follows that the freedom to contract to obtain, retain, profit from, manage, or dispose of one's property must also be upheld. Libertarians would free property owners from government restrictions on their rights to control and enjoy their property, as long as their choices do not harm or infringe on the rights of others. Eminent domain, civil asset forfeiture, governmental limits on profits, governmental production mandates, and governmental control on prices of goods and services, including wages, rents, and interest, are abridgments of such fundamental rights. For voluntary dealings among private entities, parties should be free to choose with whom they trade and set whatever trade terms are mutually agreeable. The opening sentence here lays the groundwork for what comes next, even though it doesn't logically follow. The rest of the policy is not justified by the opening, it's just meant to get you in the right state of mind to accept what follows. They stand against eminent domain, which is in the Constitution, after using that same Constitution to defend gun rights. The last sentence here, though, is interesting for what it doesn't say. Free to choose with whom they trade is a phrase that opens the door to all sorts of discrimination. And if you think I'm exaggerating or reading too much into that, later we'll see that the party platform, no lie, no exaggeration, pretty much openly supports and encourages discrimination. 2.2. Environment. Competitive free markets and property rights stimulate the technological innovations and behavioral changes required to protect our environment and ecosystems. Private landowners and conservation groups have a vested interest in maintaining natural resources. Governments are unaccountable for damage done to our environment and have a terrible track record when it comes to environmental protection. Protecting the environment requires a clear definition and enforcement of individual rights and responsibilities regarding resources like land, water, air, and wildlife. Where damages can be proven and quantified in a court of law, restitution to the injured parties must be required. What the fuck is this? There's absolutely no policy position here, and is full of accusation and unsubstantiated claims. In fact, it includes the first clearly verifiable lie of the entire party platform. The government has a terrible track record on environmental protection? That is absolutely not true. I mean, just for example, the impacts of the Clean Air Act are visible not only in ice core samples, which are visibly cleaner in layers that formed after it was passed than in layers that formed before it was passed, but in some regions are even visible in tree rings where the wood inside the tree that grew after the act was passed is brighter and cleaner than the rings that grew before. The government is people who stepped in and protected the environment from the corporations, which were laying waste to the environment before the government stepped in. This also says that private landowners have an interest in environmental protection, but individual property rights are not an environmental policy. In fact, this section makes a very specific point of not referencing the biggest destroyer of the environment, the biggest polluters on the planet, corporations. They get a free pass here. No surprise there. 2.3. Energy and resources. While energy is needed to fuel a modern society, government should not be subsidizing any particular form of energy. We oppose all government control of energy pricing, allocation, and production. I suppose this sounds okay, although basically it's just the platform saying more things that they don't want the government involved in. And let's remember, government control is why it's illegal to dump coal ash or toxic waste or other harmful industrial byproducts directly into the nearest waterway and be done with it. And if government promotion of, say, clean energy reduces pollution and protects the environment and improves resource conservation and energy production, why should we consider this a bad thing? 2.4. Government finance and spending. All persons are entitled to keep the fruits of their labor. We call for the repeal of the income tax, the abolishment of the Internal Revenue Service, and all federal programs and services not required under the U.S. Constitution. We oppose any legal requirements forcing employers to serve as tax collectors. Government should not incur debt which burdens future generations without their consent. We support the passage of a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution, provided that the budget is balanced exclusively by cutting expenditures and not by raising taxes. Did Grover Norquist write this? Because this is right out of the Shrink Government Until You Can Drown It in the Bathtub playbook. See, this is where my accusations that libertarians do not comprehend the difference between liberty and anarchy come from. And once again, no consistency. Guns are okay because the Constitution explicitly says they are. Eminent domain is not okay despite the fact the Constitution explicitly says it is. Government agencies and programs and services are not okay because the Constitution allows them but it's not specifically named them. No consistency whatsoever. It's as if the people who wrote this don't really give a damn about the Constitution or what it says. Basically, this entire entry is another one that boils down to we oppose the government and all attempts to fund it. 2.5. Government employees. We favor repealing any requirement that one must join or pay dues to a union as a condition of government employment. We advocate replacing defined benefit pensions with defined contribution plans, as are commonly offered in the private sector, so as not to impose debt on future generations without their consent. Here I could address pensions as part of the social contract, but instead I'm going to focus on the sophistry at the end, since this is the second entry in a row where they've used it. How do you get the consent of future generations on anything? And does this apply to anything but debt? Imposing upon future generations a polluted, poisoned earth by handing off environmental responsibility to the corporations? Imposing a world of stupid people by gutting education? Imposing a world where bigotry and discrimination are the rule of the land? All of this and more would be imposed on future generations by this party platform, but apparently all that is okay as long as they don't inherit debt. Please. 2.6. Money and financial markets. We favor free market banking with unrestricted competition among banks and depository institutions of all types. Markets are not actually free unless fraud is vigorously combated. Those who enjoy the possibility of profits must not impose risks of losses upon others, such as through government guarantees or bailouts. Individuals engaged in voluntary exchange should be free to use as money any mutually agreeable commodity or item. We support a halt to inflationary monetary policies and unconstitutional legal tender laws. Yes, the free market has a grand history of responsible behavior, doesn't it? Who is going to vigorously combat fraud if the agencies that do this are eliminated because they're not explicitly named in the Constitution? Yes, it's bad that businesses need bailouts, but that's because they become so large that a single business's failure could collapse the entire global economy. And since businesses become that large in the free market, it would require the government to prevent them from reaching that size in the first place, which, of course, libertarians are against. So basically, the libertarian platform here is to allow businesses to grow into behemoths, allow them to fail, and then do nothing to help anyone who's harmed by this. And that is not governance. 2.7. Marketplace freedom. Libertarians support free markets. We defend the right of individuals to form corporations, cooperatives, and other types of entities based on voluntary association. We oppose all forms of government subsidies and bailouts to business, labor, or any other special interest. Government should not compete with private enterprise. Again, bailouts have been necessary to prevent economic disaster. When this says the government should not compete with private enterprise, does that mean the government should back off whenever private enterprise takes an interest? This is a reflection of the earlier position on nationalization. They don't want the government to be involved in things like water or electric distribution. They want this to be completely privatized. Hello again, Flint, Michigan. And if a region isn't profitable enough to provide water to, I guess that region would simply not have water? Government is often involved where private enterprise will intentionally fail to do the job properly for financial reasons. Perhaps they want the profitable areas to be under the control of private industry and leave the government to take the loss on the unprofitable areas, even with the government's lack of income because taxes would be eliminated. Not sure this vision of marketplace freedom makes any sense or is at all practical in actual practice, but then that has been par for the course here. 2.8. Labor markets. Employment and compensation agreements between private employers and employees are outside the scope of government, and these contracts should not be encumbered by government-mandated benefits or social engineering. We support the right of private employers and employees to choose whether or not to bargain with each other through a labor union. Bargaining should be free of government interference, such as compulsory arbitration or imposing an obligation to bargain. So this refers to government-mandated benefits such as the minimum wage, time and a half for overtime hours, required lunch breaks, fire alarms, exits and extinguishers, child labor laws. The rest of this floats the impression of union support, but undercuts it by standing against any responsibility for a corporation to honor unions. They can make rules, they can refuse arbitration, they can refuse to negotiate, they can ignore the union completely, and no one can do anything about it. Basically, according to this, you have the right to join a union, but unions will have zero power and corporations will have absolutely no obligation to act in good faith. 2.9. Education. Education is best provided by the free market, achieving greater quality, accountability, and efficiency with more diversity of choice. Recognizing that the education of children is a parental responsibility, We would restore authority to parents to determine the education of their children without interference from government. Parents should have control of and responsibility for all funds expended for their children's education. Alright, so let's unpack this bullshit. Sentence 1, citation please. Please show evidence of greater quality, accountability, and efficiency of free market education on a national scale, not just some cherry-picked rich person's kid shuttled off to a private school. We're talking large-scale accountability and efficiency. Sentence 2, I see. So if a parent decides that their children should learn that the earth is flat, or that vaccines cause autism, or that infections should be fought with prayer instead of antibiotics, or that women, gays, transsexuals, minorities, Muslims, or really any non-white Christian male is subhuman, or that men have a right to rape women, or that proper response to confrontation of any kind is gun violence, or any other horrible, inhumane, immoral, monstrous position they may happen to believe, they should have the freedom to impart those exact beliefs to their children without anyone else having any say over it, without trying to bring any rationality or reason into it. In sentence 3, does this mean all of the money for education, or are we going with the whole zero tax thing where all funds expended are out of their own pocket? You know, Mitt Romney once said that people have a right to all the education they can afford. If a family has little or no income, do their kids have no right to an education? Nothing here says except that it'll work out because it's free market. Is anyone besides me sick to absolute death of hearing that phrase yet? 2.10, healthcare. We favor a free market healthcare system. We recognize the freedom of individuals to determine the level of health insurance they want, if any, the level of healthcare they want, the care providers they want, the medicines and treatments they will use, and all other aspects of their medical care, including end-of-life decisions. People should be free to purchase health insurance across state lines. Note the subtle key word in here, that you have the right to purchase health insurance across state lines, but you still need to buy it. No public health care, no socialized medicine, no guarantee of coverage if you get sick. Your health insurance is as good as you can afford to get, and if you can't afford health insurance in the free market system, I guess you die. But you die free from government interference, so apparently win. 2.11, retirement and income security. Retirement planning is the responsibility of the individual, not the government. Libertarians would phase out the current government-sponsored Social Security system and transition to a private voluntary system. The proper and most effective source of help for the poor is the voluntary efforts of private groups and individuals. We believe members of society will become even more charitable and civil society will be strengthened as government reduces its activity in this realm. So, Libertarians would phase out the single most successful economic safety net in the history of this country in the name of income security. They would switch to a private voluntary system with no government oversight, where retirement savings would routinely evaporate as people simply take the money and run. Hey, it happens now, it'll happen if there's less oversight. And if and when they do that, they believe that other people will pick up the slack voluntarily. That's the wholesale destruction of the only source of income for millions of Americans, the old, the ill, the infirm, the neediest among us, the most helpless among us, to be replaced with nothing more than, we're sure someone else will help you, you'll be fine. This is one of the most inhumane things I have ever seen proposed as legitimate policy. For example, one could say, we believe that a healthy and robust middle class is essential to a strong, vibrant economy, therefore we advocate proposal, whatever it is, to accomplish this. That's how belief should work in a party platform. What we get here is, we will do this and the obvious harm this will cause will be ameliorated by what we believe will happen. See, belief works as motivation for policy, not as policy itself. Have you seen various links and pleas online for help for illness or financial hardship? People creating GoFundMe accounts to pay for their illness or their hardship, having to rely on the charity of total strangers not to lose everything? Well, that is pretty much literally the Libertarian retirement plan. Begging for help from strangers. People will become more charitable, they say. Seriously, Libertarians, your entire party platform is about greed. Hoarding every penny you can, making as much money as possible, never allowing anyone to take any of it away from you. Greed is the cornerstone of your entire economic policy. Charity is not something you advocate at any point in this party platform, except right here, where it's all you've got to divorce yourself from the consequences of destroying the only source of income for the worst off among us, the people who need it most. Helping others is not what you are about. I'm not impressed with pretending that a projected increase in charity is a valid replacement for support for individuals who are physically incapable of participating in your oh-so-precious free market. This is hurtful, this is vicious, this is cruel, and frankly, this is a goddamn disgrace. 3.0 Securing Liberty. The protection of individual rights is the only proper purpose of government. Government is constitutionally limited so as to prevent the infringement of individual rights by the government itself. The principle of non-initiation of force should guide the relationships between governments. The Constitution, the document that establishes our government, its power, and its authority, says that the purpose of government is to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. The Libertarians say the protection of individual rights is the only proper purpose of government. I'd say the Libertarians have got this one very much wrong. 3.1 National Defense. We support the maintenance of a sufficient military to defend the United States against aggression. The United States should both avoid entangling alliances and abandon its attempts to act as policemen for the world. We oppose any form of compulsory national service. Now that we're out of the economics section, I can finally say about something that this is okay for the most part, especially since America has the most expensive bloated military in the history of the planet. 3.2 Internal Security and Individual Rights. The defense of the country requires that we have adequate intelligence to detect and to counter threats to domestic security. This requirement must not take priority over maintaining the civil liberties of our citizens. The Constitution and Bill of Rights shall not be suspended even during time of war. Intelligence agencies that legitimately seek to preserve the security of the nation must be subject to oversight and transparency. We oppose the government's use of secret classifications to keep from the public information that it should have, especially that which shows that the government has violated the law. I support moving in this direction, though when it comes to intelligence in this context, there are always valid reasons to keep certain secrets, even for information the public should arguably have. And note that they are against suspension of the Constitution and Bill of Rights during war, even though they are all for totally disregarding as a matter of course entire sections of the Constitution and Bill of Rights that they don't like. 3.3 International Affairs. American foreign policy should seek an America at peace with the world. Our foreign policy should emphasize defense against attack from abroad and enhance the likelihood of peace by avoiding foreign entanglements. We would end the current U.S. government policy of foreign intervention, including military and economic aid. We recognize the right of all people to resist tyranny and defend themselves and their rights. We condemn the use of force, and especially the use of terrorism against the innocent, regardless of whether such acts are committed by governments or by political or revolutionary groups. Well, this is all over the map. America at peace? Good start. Emphasize defense? Also good. Avoid foreign entanglements? Vague, but sounds good. End military and economic aid? Not as good, but then Libertarians don't want to give a damn thing to anyone, even if it saves lives, except as a retirement plan, apparently. People have a right to resist tyranny and defend themselves? Are we still talking about international affairs here? We condemn the use of force and terrorism against the innocent? Well, that's a bold stance. But only if they're committed by governments or political groups, notice, because if they're committed by individuals, no, I guess that's personal responsibility. And if they're committed by corporations, that's the free market. Again, it's only a problem if the government does it. 3.4 Free Trade and Migration. We support the removal of governmental impediments to free trade. Political freedom and escape from tyranny demand that individuals not be unreasonably constrained by government in the crossing of political boundaries. Economic freedom demands the unrestricted movement of human as well as financial capital across national borders. However, we support control over the entry into our country of foreign nationals who pose a credible threat to security, health, or property. When you are clearly against constraints or regulations of any kind, short of the ending shout out to terrorism here, you've gone well beyond eliminating unreasonable constraint and are rocketing into anarchy. So in this context, unrestricted movement refers to a race to the bottom. Cheapest materials, least safety regulations, slave labor, terrible for people, but great for business profit margins. 3.5, Rights and Discrimination. Libertarians embrace the concept that all people are born with certain inherent rights. We reject the idea that a natural right can ever impose an obligation upon others to fulfill that right. We condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant. Government should neither deny nor abridge any individual's human right based upon sex, wealth, ethnicity, creed, age, national origin, personal habits, political preference, or sexual orientation. Members of private organizations retain the rights to set whatever standards of association they deem appropriate, and individuals are free to respond with ostracism, boycotts, and other free market solutions. Well, this is a total mess. I'm sure supporters will have 1,001 contradictory explanations to dismiss this, but the first two sentences essentially boil down to people have rights and no one is obliged to respect those rights. And that lays important groundwork for the vile, appalling, absolutely repugnant end to this section. Government may not deny or abridge any individual's rights based on a laundry list of characteristics and behaviors, but the very next sentence says that private organizations retain their rights to set whatever standards of association they deem appropriate. So all those things that they deny governments the right to use as a basis for discrimination against, they immediately give carte blanche to private organizations to use as a basis for discrimination. I mean, read that again. The Libertarian Party platform openly supports discrimination as long as it's not the government doing it. And if the private organizations refuse to write a mortgage to a black person or health insurance for a woman or whatever, that individual's recourse is to boycott the organization that refuses to work with them. This is terrible. There is absolutely nothing redeeming about this. It's a call for legal discrimination, and it is disgusting, and no one who stands against bigotry should have any tolerance for this crap. 3.6, Representative Government. We support election systems that are more representative of the electorate at the federal, state, and local levels. As private voluntary groups, political parties should be free to establish their own rules for nomination procedures, primaries, and conventions. We call for an end to any tax-financed subsidies to candidates or parties, and the repeal of all laws which restrict voluntary financing of election campaigns. We oppose laws that effectively exclude alternative candidates and parties, deny ballot access, gerrymander districts, or deny the voters their right to consider all legitimate alternatives. We advocate initiative, referendum, recall, and repeal when used as popular checks on government. So they feel that Citizens United was a good thing, replacing one person, one vote with $1, one vote. The rest of this entry basically becomes irrelevant because it's cementing the exclusion that they're complaining about. The self-serving bit about alternate candidates will never come to fruition when they allow moneyed interests to buy every step of the process and lock everyone else out. And again, they're for initiative, referendum, recall, and repeal, but again, only against governments, not against anything else. Same thing all over again. We almost done yet? 3.7, Self-determination. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of individual liberty, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to agree to such new governance as to them shall seem most likely to protect their liberty. Blah, blah, blah. When whatever's left of government we're through becomes inconvenient, get rid of it. 4.0, Emissions. Our silence about any other particular government law, regulation, ordinance, directive, edict, control, regulatory agency activity, or machination should not be construed to apply approval. Lawyers approve of this message. I gave myself some time to sort through this mentally before I tried to sum it up. The way I see it, there is some good in here, but there's a lot of bad, and ultimately the bad comes down to two things which weigh the entire platform down. One is a flawed assumption, and the other is an utter omission. And once we go over those, we'll get to the bottom line of what this party actually is and what it represents. We'll start with the flawed assumption. The Libertarian Party platform is predicated on the belief that the less oversight there is on businesses and on people, but especially on businesses, the better they'll behave. It's hard to express how fundamentally, utterly wrong this is. Conservatives frequently complain about onerous regulation, about how businesses are harmed by the laws and rules and regulations that they have to function under, but those laws are usually there for a good reason. Yeah, there's some crap in there always is, but most laws and regulations are monuments to the people who died who would have lived had those rules been in place earlier. I'll give a simple example. Virtually every business that you enter will have a door that opens outward. This is something that people generally don't think about, but it is a legal requirement, and it has been in most places since shortly after the Coconut Grove nightclub fire of 1942, which killed 492 people. When the fire started, people were unable to exit the building because the main entrance was a revolving door which jammed. Some windows were boarded over, many side exits were barred shut to prevent people from skipping out without paying, and some that weren't opened inward, so crowds of people trying to escape the blaze pushed up against it, and the people up front couldn't pull the doors open. So now doors have to open outward so that you don't have that problem. It seems simple and obvious, but before it was a law, it wasn't done, and people died as a result. It's likely impossible to calculate how many lives have been saved merely by making it easier to exit from a building in an emergency, as well as resulting changes in laws regarding sprinkler systems and other fire suppression efforts. Curse that overbearing government, right? Now, not all causes and effects are so clear, but just because we can't identify the reasons for the existence of certain rules off the top of our heads doesn't mean that the reasons don't exist. But even if they exist for a good reason, they cost money, so then we get back to the obsessive references to the free market. Here's a decoder for you. When libertarians use the words free market, merely substitute for profit. Each person has the right to offer goods and services to others on the for-profit system. Education is best provided by the for-profit system. We favor a for-profit healthcare system. We favor for-profit banking. Libertarians support for-profit systems. Just anywhere you see it, it's about money. But how is that good for anyone but business owners? Businesses need to be regulated because they have a long history of scorching the earth for profit. Suppose you manufacture a life-saving drug and you boost the cost of the prescription from $100 to $1,000, and suddenly 80% of the people taking it can't afford it. 20% of people paying 10 times as much doubles your sales dollars and lowers your manufacturing costs since you're only making 20% as much. And 80% of the people who need it die because they can't afford it. But that's a good free market business decision. Ridiculous scenario, you may say? Google Martin Shkreli. In the 1980s, once deregulation really got going in the United States, General Motors closed many factories in Detroit during a period of record profits to further increase their profit margin. That was a good free market business decision, and thousands of people lost their jobs in the region, including Detroit itself, have never truly recovered. Some years ago, 2013, the West Fertilizer Company near Waco, Texas had a massive explosion that killed 15 people and injured hundreds more, and the damages were paid for by who knows really, but not the company that caused it, because the company responsible for the damage only had a $1 million liability policy, and that was optional too. Texas state law did not require a facility of their nature to carry liability insurance, even if they had explosive chemicals on site, because they are at the forefront of American deregulation. And as deregulation and anti-regulation spread, we have proposals that making a new regulation requires rescinding two existing ones. Making one thing more safe by making two other things less safe is a net loss, but that's the direction that we are working in. That's the direction of the free market, with the government staying out of the way and allowing businesses to work more cheaply. So as a result, for example, high-rises are built with highly flammable facades and are not equipped with sprinkler systems, so when a fire gets going, there's nothing to stop it. And thus Grenfell Tower in London burned. And months later, a final death toll from the fire has not been determined. But think about that. It's a residential building housing hundreds of people, and it had no sprinkler system, no way to douse fires, because a sprinkler system would increase the cost and it wasn't required. So they made the free market businesses not to bother. Everyone has a story, multiple stories, of being screwed over by a business or a corporation and not having any recourse. It's happened to all of us. Even with all of this going on, regulation is what stopped the worst of the abuses in the first place. Like most people, businesses given no motivation to the contrary will generally look out for themselves exclusively. The list of corporations abusing power, the examples can be found, are nearly limitless. History is rife with them. And we're supposed to believe that, if left unregulated, these same businesses would suddenly develop a social conscience? Which brings us to the omission of the party platform, which is specifically any sense or acknowledgement of society. This platform is driven by individualism and individual rights and individual liberties, but there's no indication of any concept of responsibility to society as a whole. Nothing about societies, nothing about communities, nothing about working together, unless you count their belief that once they destroy Social Security, other people, I assume non-libertarians, will step up and help people. This is a party platform that's bereft of any concept of society, of any picture beyond people doing what they want and making all the money they want and keeping all the money they want and just generally not giving a damn about anyone or anything else. But that's not governance, which is not a surprise because they are against government in just about every way imaginable. But we'll get to that at the very end here. As far as society goes, well, some years back, President Obama was blasted for the whole carefully removed from context, "you didn't build that" quote. He was referring to the fact that individual accomplishments occur in the context of the world around them and the foundations that were built before them. Electricity, power lines, roads, water, infrastructure in general are all necessary for businesses to function. If you're running a business, you need these things. You need the technology invented by others. You need suppliers, you need distribution, you need customers. You are reliant on all of this. None of it is possible as an individual purely independent of all others. And one of the big problems with our society today, and there are many, is that we largely don't care about others anymore. If it doesn't impact us or immediate families, we just don't care. Even businesses used to care for and look out for people. There was a time, not all that long ago, when pensions were commonplace. The perspective of the company was along the lines of, you spent 40 years working for us and taking care of us, and now that you're retired, we're going to make sure that you're taken care of in turn. And then, fairly abruptly, the mindset turned to maximizing profits, and pensions were a drain on that, so they were mostly eliminated and replaced with things like 401ks, which were designed to supplement pensions, but were never intended to replace them. Once you couldn't provide profitable labor to the company, they were done with you and you were on your own. And so retirees became more dependent on Social Security, which libertarians want to eliminate. Because the plight of others is not their problem or their responsibility. It's happening to someone else. They don't care. But the business profit margin increased. And that's what they call government. See, somewhere along the line, we replace any semblance of the social contract with a mindset of what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. There's a divorce between the concept of the well-being of society and the well-being of the people living in it. There's a belief that anyone who tries hard enough and wants it enough can succeed over any disadvantage, over any circumstance. And this carries with it the unfortunate corollary that anyone who fails just didn't try hard enough. And once you get there, that's how you divorce yourself from any responsibility for what happens to anyone else. That's how you declare that a person being buried by circumstance is their personal failure. That a person who goes bankrupt because the place they work laid them off or they got sick and the insurance wouldn't cover them, but they should have just prepared better. That if a person gets beaten or raped or killed, they should have protected themselves better. That's how you victim blame. Because if you can blame the victim for whatever has happened to them, you can wash your hands of it and not give a shit about anyone else but yourself. But these are the details that get hidden under the sheen of the libertarian platform. This platform presents a lot of ideals without grasping consequence, because the consequences are ancillary to their actual goals. The platform promotes and touts independence and liberty and freedom from outside influence and personal responsibility for one's own life, but that is actually all smokescreen. The entire platform stands one step short of advocating for genuine anarchy. It stands against the government doing anything, accomplishing anything, overseeing anything, affording anything. And it supports business and private industry having free rein, most especially without government oversight or regulation. The true purpose of the Libertarian Party platform is to cripple or destroy the government for the benefit of business. The Libertarian Party platform presents a world by oligarchs for oligarchs. The rich consolidate their power, the rich are immune to oversight and criticism, the rich are free from paying taxes, the rich can do whatever the hell they want. The only current check on the rich and the corporations is generally the government, which will look out for people instead of profit and defend society over the acquisition of wealth, and that is anathema to this party platform. So the government is expressly forbidden by the libertarians from doing pretty much anything. The government can't regulate trade, the government can't protect the environment, the government can't promote clean energy, the government can't raise taxes, the government can't protect workers, the government can't provide education, the government can't support the sick or the elderly, and all of these things benefit business. This platform, should it come to fruition, would create a world led by corporations, not government, by business interests, not the public's interests. The goal here is to destroy anything that can stand against business interests, and to do that, they vilify the government in every way they can. But a smokescreen is required because the general public is not going to stand up and demand that people treat businesses better. Nobody gets screwed over by their medical insurance and says, if only the company had freer reign, I'd be better off. That just doesn't happen. So the way the oligarchs sell this to the general public is to latch it onto the concept of personal responsibility and intrusive government. They try to convince people that government is a bad force in their lives, a net negative, a harmful influence. They play up any negative they can find and couch it inside the fear-mongering presentation of the government is taking away your freedom to do this, your right to do that. The government has influence in all these aspects of your life and you need to take control back. And once they can get people worked up against the government, they can add, yeah, they're doing it to businesses too, as an afterthought, and that gets tacked on, and they've got people agreeing businesses are victimized by the government too, when in fact government is the one institution that can openly stand against business practices and require them to behave more ethically. But the whole personal liberty, freedom to live your life argument that they make, I agree with a lot of it, but as presented in the party platform, it's completely useless. It's easy to say that you support people freely exercising religion or choosing their own personal relationships or standing for people's right to exercise their own sexual preference or gender identity. But when you couch all of those freedoms in the argument that the government has no right to act on these things or to discriminate on these bases, but later on explicitly state members of private organizations retain their rights to set whatever standards of association they deem appropriate, and when you say people are born with inherent rights, but we reject the idea that a natural right can ever impose an obligation upon others to fulfill that right, you are completely undercutting all of that. All of the freedoms argued for, all of the freedoms that they imply they support, everything that is in the platform to appeal to the common person, carries absolutely no requirement for anyone else to respect those choices or to treat people equally despite what choices they make. The government has to, but no one else does, and the government will have no power or authority to correct that. You have the right to live how you want, and everyone who doesn't like it is free to do anything short of initiating physical violence against you to make you suffer for it, and that is completely okay by the letter of this platform. You can be bullied, discriminated against, denied equal opportunity, rejected for employment, business owners can deny you service, and under the Libertarian Party platform, every bit of that is a perfectly acceptable free market business practice. You have rights, but no one will defend them. Except you. You stand alone. Even more so than now, you will stand alone. I guess that's personal responsibility again. But what the party promises with the left hand, they take away with the right. The free market presented as a solution to all ills to get people to sign on to selling themselves out. So yes, there are some decent ideas in the Libertarian Party platform and some things that I can get behind, but they need to be universal, not just restricted to government action. And as a whole, the party platform would ultimately harm the majority of Americans for the benefit of the few fortunate rich people who would gain control over just about everything. It's heartless and it's cruel and it's not designed to benefit the general public in any way. So if you're looking for a third-party alternative, you can do a lot better than being little more than a pro-drug Republican. There has to be something better out there than the Republicans and the Democrats. But this ain't it.